Hello, my name is Alec Sutton.
Mr. Sutton, where and when were you born?
4th of the 11th, 23, in Liverpool.
So how old are you right now?
96.
Do you feel like you're 96?
No.
Physically, what is it like to be 96?
Like it was being 86. No difference. I can still walk as far as I could when I was 86, so no problems.
And tell me, Mr. Sutton, what branch of the military were you in during the Second World War?
The Parachute Regiment, the 6th Royal Welsh Fusiliers Parachute Regiment.
And what company were you in?
I was in support company Vickers Platoon, heavy machine guns.
And talk to me about the role of the heavy machine guns in combat. How are you all assigned to support the rifle companies?
Well, the heavy machine guns are used at long distances. They're not a short distance gun. So you're usually used as backups to troops advancing.
And tell me, Mr. Sutton, what was your specific job in the Vickers machine gun platoon?
I was a sergeant in charge of one machine gun and 10 men.
And tell me about the role of being in charge of the gun and the men. As a sergeant, what are your responsibilities?
To see that the correct amount of ammunition is with your gun and positioning your men in proper positions during the conflict.
So where all did you see action, Mr. Sutton?
In Africa, Italy, France, Greece, and Palestine.
And what was the highest rank you achieved by the time you left the service?
Colour sergeants. That's 3 stripes and a crown above it.
And so, before we continue any further, I would like to backtrack a little bit. You mentioned you were born in Liverpool.
Yeah.
Did you grow up there?
Yes.
Can you talk to me about growing up in Liverpool? What kind of things did you do for fun as a kid?
Mainly football, as you can guess, looking at the trophies up there. I was pretty athletic. I was in a gym as well. I went to a gym 2 or 3 times a week. I was pretty active.
What was the structure of your family? How many brothers or sisters did you have?
I had 1 brother and 1 sister. So my father went away to sea. He was just an ordinary seaman. He went to sea until I was about 6, and then he got a job working for the Liverpool Waterworks. I think it was on the engineer side, but I wouldn't be a problem. He died at 95, and he's buried in Liverpool.
Did your other brother, did he also serve in the war?
No, he wasn't born until I was in North Africa, so I don't know he must be nearly 70 now, surely, mustn't he?
Before the war broke out in 1939,
Yeah.
what were you planning on doing with your life?
Well, I was working for the education, in the education offices. I was working in the education offices as a junior clerk. And I wrote a letter to the Director of Education asking permission to join the forces. And he sent for me, and I was only 17, and he said, "Sit down, young man." He said, "Do you know," he said, "there's nearly 100 people left the education department and gone to war without asking my permission." He says, "You are the only one that have had the decency to let me know of your intention. Now, I tell you what I'm going to do for you." He said, "I'm going to pay your wages until your army pay is greater than what I'm paying you. I will make the difference up." I said, "Oh, thank you very much." And that's what happened. I went down to Renshaw Hall to join up. And he says, "How old are you?" I said, 18, Sarge. He says, "You're a bloody liar." He says, "You're not 18. So I knew they changed over at dinner time and another fellow will be there. So I went there. "How old are you?" I said, 18, Sarge. So he said, you got your birth certificate with you?" I said, "No, I showed it to the fella this morning." He says, "He hasn't put that down, in lazy bugger." So he says, "Okay," he signed me on. And I went to the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, which is just across the river, Mersey, to Rill for training. And in the midst of my training, Dunkirk happened. And one of the first officers to arrive back in a Royal Welsh Fusilier was a film star. He was a major in the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. And from there I went sent on a Brent carrier course down to Brecon Beacon, that's in southern England, Wales, sorry. And I was only there 3 days. And the sergeant says, "Son, Major wants to see you." So went in, saluted. "How old are you?" I said, 18, sir. He says, "You're a bloody liar. I've got a letter off your mother here." So I was put in a young soldiers battalion. We're all under 18. And I was there for, a year. And we used to do drone guards, all the aerodromes. And in Lincolnshire, where we are now, there was a drone guard every 6 miles probably. There was that many planes there, all Polish airmen. And we did, and then one day we were all formed up in rank. And somebody said, "We are starting a new regiment. Would anybody like to join the parachute regiment?" And we had a corporal who was looking after us, and he must have been about 35. And he says, "Hey, Mike, what the bloody hell's the parachute regiment?" He says, "I don't know, but it must be better than drum guards." So we all joined that. And you went there, and you went through such severe... Everything on you were checked. Eyes, colours, strength of your arm, your legs, how high you could jump, everything appertaining to movement of body or structure. And then you went in for the mind part of it, asking you questions and do you know this, do you know that? And anyway, I passed and I went into the 6th Battalion, the Royal Welsh 6th Battalion. And from there I made my way up to Colour Sergeant in Palestine.
So, thank you for sharing that story with me. What possessed you at such a young age to join the service? You know, what was it about the service that made you feel that you shouldn't wait to be drafted or to be called up, but you had to get in right now? You know, what was it?
Well, a lot of my mates were older than me, and they'd joined, you know, and I was left more or less on my own. So I didn't want to be on my own, so I joined.
Did you tell your parents that you were joining?
No, because my dad wouldn't have allowed it.
So how did your parents eventually find out you had joined the service?
I wrote him a letter. I telephoned him. He come out with the right mouthful, like, you know.
What do you mean?
Swearing at me.
On the phone?
Yeah.
This was after you'd already joined?
I was in Rill, so there's nothing you could do about it.
And so the letter that your mom had written, do you know what it said?
No, only that I was under 18 and I shouldn't be in there.
But there was enough people in your position that they had a whole outfit of men, of boys.
Oh, yeah. Young soldiers battalions, they were. We were down the other side of Aldershot, we were based. And then we moved further south. Right next to Stonehenge, where all the big modelled... We were stationed there for the winter in tents, and it's right out on the plains. And eventually they pulled us back into some inside accommodation. And from there we got inspected by King George VI. We were lined up, and being a Welsh regiment, we had a goat mascot, as big as that's my dog. And he spent 3 days washing, cleaning it, rubbing white powder in, and we got lined up, and the king come and started, and the dog turned on its back, peed up in the air, all over itself, and you could smell it from 30 yards away.
What the goat did?
Yeah. And the king come through, and the goat major was kicking the goat all over the show. 3 days work spoils.
So, can you actually tell me about the physical training you received once you started, you know, the course of becoming a paratrooper? You know, tell me about the physical...
You started 6 o'clock in the morning. You were on a half an hour run before your breakfast. And we had a Major Pritchard, who later became a colonel, then a brigadier, and then a general. We had him, and he used to take us out. And we were eventually in the 6th Royal Welsh Battalion. And then from our basic training, which was everything, as I said, with your eyes, whether you're colour blinded, all that come in handy later on. And then we went from there. We went from by sea to North Africa, and we were there for about 6 months training. And the 8th Army were pushing out of the desert through North Africa towards us, and they eventually reached us. And then we did a practice jump for Sicily, and on the practice jump, that is when I landed on a 20-foot cactus, and it took half an hour pulling me off because the cactus prongs were about that long. I was in hospital, I say, for 7 days. And then my mate come down, Carl Russell, an Irishman. He was the only natural killer I've ever seen in the forces.
What do you mean?
He loved what he was doing. And he'd go out on his own looking for Germans. He was a natural, it's what he liked doing. Where an ordinary soldier kills to stay alive, not Carl. And anyway, he come to the tented hospital I was with, which was 17 miles away from where he was stationed, and said, I think we're on the move. So I said, okay, I'll see you in the morning. So he left. So I waited till midnight. Through the canvas windows, all my gear, found out, walked for the best part of 10 mile, and some Yanks picked me up and did the last 7 mile. I got back. I reported to the medical orderly, back, and would he continue with the treatment, on me back. And he did. And a month later, we landed in Italy. Oh, we didn't land in Italy, we swam in Italy. And that was it.
Tell me about your first practice jump that you made.
It was a balloon jump out of balloons. Go to about 800 to 1,000 feet. Depends on how you jump out. There's a side door, and you just step out into thin air, and you can even hear the rustle of the silk when the parachute's opening. It's that still and desolate, if you know what I mean.
Were you nervous or scared before you making the first jump?
No, I always had a saying, and I still got it today. If he can do it, I can. And that was my motto, no matter who he was. If he can do it, I can.
So in the United States, in order to become a paratrooper, you have to qualify with 5 jumps.
Oh, yeah.
One of them being a night jump.
That's it.
What is the process in the United Kingdom?
Well, we did a night jump out of a balloon.
So, with all of your practice jumps, did you make any practice jumps out of a plane?
Yes, yeah. Out of Whitney bombers. And the fuselage of a Whitney bomber is just about the height of your... You couldn't sit up straight in the Whitney bomber. You were crouched over. And after an hour or so flying, you'd have got out without a chute. There's that many holes in the Whitney bomber, shrapnel holes and all that. And it was a hole through the floor, not through the door. You had 5 sitting each side of the hole, and you swung your feet in, and you pushed off. And if you didn't push off hard enough, your face hit the other side of the thing before you went out. And if you pushed too hard, your face hit anyway. So you had to be very careful. There's bags of broken noses and bruises. I mean, you did 7 practice jumps and 2 balloon jumps. 1 balloon jump by night and 1 parachute jump at night.
And in the United States, when you successfully complete the jumps in training, you get what we call your wings.
That's right. Yeah. Same.
You would have special wings you would wear on your uniform?
Yeah, on your shoulder. Yeah.
And tell me, Mr. Sutton, most American paratroopers, they used static line, where you're all hooked up to the line.
That's right.
And then you jump out the door.
Same.
But the difference with the British is that there was a hole in the floor of the plane.
That was starting off, and then they got better planes where we were jumping through, and it was Douglas. They were American bombers we jumped out of, with a door on. And we were using the same planes as what the Americans were using eventually.
You were all hooked up to...
Yeah. There was a wire running down the centre of the plane which you hooked on. And as you walked along, you knocked your... it was like a clasp on the wire, knocked it till you're facing the door, and then out you went.
Continue, please, with your story of going into action. So after you qualify as a paratrooper and you get your wings,
yeah,
how do you get overseas and where do you go first?
We went by sea to North Africa, and then we did practice jumps ready for Sicily. We got in the plane to go to Sicily, got over the dropping zone, and then we turned back because our objective had been taken by the 8th Army. So we landed back in North Africa. And of course, the boat hit a mine and went down, and we lost approximately about 200 men. But we also lost some specialists that were going over there to have a look at the Italian naval base 2-men submarines, because they were so far advanced over the rest of the world, the ITIs and 2-men submarines. They were going over to see what they could take off, but they went down with the ship as well, unfortunately.
So we're going to talk about that right now.
In North Africa, we boarded the HMS Aberdeen to go to Italy. We arrived outside Italy. We're waiting in a line of ships to unload, and we hit a mine. And the ship listed right away. But when we hit the mine, the explosion blew me 10 foot up the side of one of the funnels, and it scorched the back of my haversack. I landed back on my feet, turned round, the ship was already badly listing, and we had a new officer in charge of the Vickers, and he said, "Follow me," and he jumped over the ship into the sea, which was listing that badly that he only jumped about 6 foot into the water, followed by some of the men, and it was slowly getting worse, and in the end it was lapping our feet, and I pushed off and just swam through a maze of bodies and men trying to make the best of it. And I never heard anybody calling for help all the time I was in the sea. But I heard a story later on that the doctor on the ship got off and got hold of a little Italian boat that was going out to sea, and made that his clinic, and he was hauling badly hurt men that had been damaged by the explosion, and you were allowed to hold the side of the ship for 5 minutes, and then an officer would tap you on the shoulder and say, "Off you go, son," and off they'd fly into just dense. You couldn't see a star, you couldn't see anything. It was just totally black, and they'd just let go and off they'd go into the distance. You wouldn't know whether they survived or not.
Why were they only allowed to hold on for 5 minutes?
Because there was that many injured and that many waiting to have a breather on the side of the ship before they carried on.
And so, going back to your experiences, so once you get in the water, what do you see immediately?
Nothing. You couldn't see your hand in front of you. It was that black. All you could hear was people swimming ahead of you and splashing. And then the splashing would stop and you know they'd gone down. And you'd swim right over that spot. There's nothing you can do about it.
So what was your plan,
Stay alive, that's all.
But if you couldn't see where you were, if you were swimming, I mean, why not just swim in the same place, Why don't you just wade water?
Well, you don't know. You think you're swimming towards the shore, but literally most of us were swimming out to sea when we were picked up. It was an hour and a half before the Royal Navy big ships they had lowered boats and started picking people up. And we were picked up by this big ship onto the deck. We were rescued and we were on the deck of the ship. There must have been about 200 being pulled out the sea, and most of them in dead nude, taking everything off. And they were lined up, and I was with another two Scousers, people from Liverpool, and I said, "Shout down the hatch there. There's bound to be some of the crew down there, the maintenance crew and the engineers come from Liverpool." So Jimmy Pawsley shouted down, "Any Scousers down there?" And he says, "Yeah." He said, "Well, throw us some clothes up." So there was three of us fully rigged out when the officer come and going along, and he had a little stick and he was poking him in the belly. He said, "You're all right, son, aren't you?" "Yes, sir." "You're all right, son?" "Yes, sir." "You're all right?" "Yes, sir." Come to us, and he says, "Where'd you get the clothes from?" He says, "Down below, sir." He said, "Did they throw them out to you?" He said, "No, we asked for them, sir, and they're all Scousers down there, sir." "Oh, I might have known," and walked on.
How many men died in the...
Well, I said about roughly 200. It could be more, it could be less, I don't know.
When you were swimming in the water, I mean, an hour and a half is a long time.
Well,
it's not like you're in a lap pool. I mean, you're in the sea.
Yeah, but it was calm, and it was 3rd of December. The water was still warm. We were in the Adriatic Sea. And it would have been a nice swim under other circumstances.
Did you link up with anyone when you were in the water?
No. I heard somebody swimming ahead of me, and then it stopped, and I knew he'd gone down. And there's nothing you could do to help. You were on your last couple of strokes yourself, if you know what I mean. I was trying to float because I had it's like a tube round my waist, but I couldn't inflate it properly because my jackknife, which is a string, a knife on a string round my waist, was partly across it, so I couldn't blow it up properly, but I could blow it up slightly. And anyway, we eventually got picked up. We were all right.
How did you mentioned it was so dark you couldn't see in front of you.
No, you couldn't.
How did you see or hear the rescue ship?
By voice. You could hear them splashing, and some were picking you up by boats with oars. Mostly were just engine jobs. And you just shout, and they'd hear your voice and come over.
And so it was a little boat that picked you up that brought you to the bigger ship.
Yeah, the little speedboats. They'd hold about 6, 7 men, 8 men.
And so tell me about your speedboat. I mean, what were you doing when you heard the boat?
Crying for help. That's what I was crying over here. And it picked about 6 of us up, took us up to a ladder. You climbed up onto the deck, and that was it.
What was the state of the other men in the speedboat?
The same as me, buggered. Yeah. On the last, I wouldn't have lasted much longer.
So after you all get rescued and you're brought aboard the ship, what happens to you?
They dropped us off in Taranto, which was the Italian chief naval base anyway. So there was bags of accommodation for us. They got there, they gave us some clothes, and then we started a 220-mile walk up the Adriatic coast. The Germans were slowly retreating in front of us. Not my regiment, there was regiments in front of us, but we were back up. And we got to Barry, and somebody said our ship with all our new clothing is in the harbour. And we walked about another 10 miles, and then somebody come in. The ship which had our equipment in has been sank by the Germans. So we were out of proper clothing until we got attached to the New Zealand div, and General Freiberg took over, and he looked after us as if we were one of his own. We bumped about 15 mile from Taranto going along the coast. We bumped into the outskirts of the German rear guard, and that was the first really time we'd used the heavy machine gun firing their rear guard. And what the Germans used to do is wander up the coast, come to a river, and then dig in the other side of the river. All the rivers in Italy run across, and they used them as fortifications. And that's why it took so long in Italy, taking Italy. And we went right up to Osonia. And we were took over off the Gurkhas on this pinnacle of rock. It must have been 200 to 300 yards high and 3/4 of a mile wide. We took over off the Gurkhas, and it was sticking into the German lines for about 800 yards. But there was only one pathway up, and they used to shell us regular. But we heard a rattle of stones, somebody coming up the path, because it was one of those like gravelly paths coming up 200 yards. And we felt it getting to the top, opened up with a machine gun, 200 rounds off, and then we stopped. And then 4th Battalion was the nearest to the pathway, and all we heard was laughing. And eventually, Sergeant Major of the 4th Battalion come over and says, yeah, as usual, 6th Battalion, get all the glory, don't you? I said, what are you talking about? He said, do you know what you shot? You've shot a bloody donkey. It wasn't human beings.
Could you tell me, Mr. Sutton, you mentioned that the Vickers platoon is a support for the riflemen.
That's right.
Usually from the front line, how far back would the Vickers platoon and you be?
Well, what would happen is that you're talking when we're static.
Yeah.
When we're static. Well, we would have platoons of men in front of us because we're not heavily armed. They'd have rifles and they'd have machine guns and light automatic weapons, and we'd be probably a couple of 100 yards behind them.
And what about when you guys were on the offensive?
Well, on the offensive, we had canvas carriers with pumped up wheels, 2 wheels and 2 shafts. And we could get all our gear on that. And we could advance with 2 men in front and 3 each side and a couple behind. We could advance forward like that. And then the major had come over and says, put your gun down there, that's your firing position. Get ready to fire, and that was it.
And can you describe the Vickers machine gun to me, please?
Well, I think it was 56 pound in weight. It was air-cooled. Fired ordinary ammunition, the same as used in rifles. They were in belts of, I think there were 200 to a belt. And we used to carry about 12 belts of ammunition when we had the sleigh. When we were on the move, like, you know. And you'd have the sergeants usually sitting behind the gunner. You'd have the gunner, and you'd have 4 men each side of you with rifles or a Tommy gun here and there thrown in. Not Tommy guns, the Sten guns thrown in as a guard round your gun, like. That's all.
What weapon did you personally carry?
Weapon. I had a revolver because you can't sit in a small hole with a rifle or anything, and you had rifles and Sten guns which were automatic like Tommy guns. That's what's the 12 men would be issued out, and probably 6 Sten guns, 4 rifles, and that'd be the 10. We did a night attack, and we were amongst them 20 minutes, and then realised we were taking on too much, that eventually they would either capture us or kill us. So we retreated back to the main body.
Can you tell me more about this night attack? Where was it?
Outside Barletta.
And
in Italy, on the Adriatic coast.
And did you guys open fire at all?
Oh, yeah.
So what do you personally remember about what you experienced that night?
No, it's pitch black. You were firing at figures. You didn't know whether he was a sergeant or officer or who it was. And we realised we were outgunned, so we had to fall back. But there was usually, we were put in as an afterthought, if you know what I mean. The real fighting had been gone on in front of us. It was more like mopping up little 3 or 4 people here and there, the regiments the infantry regiments had done all the work. Monte Cassino was blocking the only road for us to advance, and it was towering above the road. I mean, we ended up at Monte Cassino, and then they used us behind the German lines. We were going behind German lines and sussing out what regiment they were fighting against us. And then they shifted us from there across the main road to the other side of the road. And we were up in the mountains there, just more or less isolated, covering the main roadway. But when we first started there, we come over from Naples in jeeps, 12 o'clock at night, down to the bridge. You had to go over the bridge to get into Cassino. And a military policeman dived out of a hole and waved us over. You've just missed a barrage. I said, I know, we heard it. They'll be any minute now. Go on, off you pop. And we were across the bridge in, and we were stationed in the railway station. In some old carriages, broken down carriages there. And then we moved from there across to the other side of the road, up into the hills, as I was saying. And all we were doing was little 10-man strikes into anyway, just keeping our eyes on the Germans, really, and seeing what they were doing. 10-man patrols.
Did you go on any of these patrols?
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell me about some of the patrols and how they would work?
Nothing. You just get out there, you get close enough to hear them talking, and then you'd realise it was all night patrols, or you'd have been dead. And you could more or less guess how many was talking there, and you try not to engage them. All you were doing was doing a recount on who was against you, and then the proper infantry battalions had come and know the strength of what they were against. It was a lot of... No, there was nothing definite we did at Casino when they moved us up into the mountains.
Could you please tell me about some of your experiences under German artillery bombardments?
Well, it's not very nice. You just keep your head down and hope for the best. You get in the nearest hole and get as far as you can down it, and lie and cover your on your hands and knees and cover your ears up and hope for the best. That's all you can do.
How close would these shells get to your position?
It depends where you were. Some were very close, some were miles away. But we were fighting German paratroopers. They held the... And when we eventually took... the Paras never took Casino. They were part of the group there. Some of them had shell shock. They'd come out, they were, just completely gone. The brain had just shattered. And they were just... Because they must have had 100 planes dropping bombs on them.
Can you describe to me, what do you remember about the destruction of the monastery? What did you see?
Only pieces of it flying all over the show. Yeah, just a sky full of planes waiting in turn to get in a single line so they could get a good drop onto the... It's noise coming over in twos and threes because you've got two of your planes are going to miss the... And that's what they were doing, just taking turns apiece, dropping bombs.
Do you believe that the Germans were using the monastery before it was bombed for an observation point?
I think they probably were, yeah. If they had any sense, they were, and which Germans do have sense.
Because that's a big argument for a lot of people, whether or not they were actually using it.
Well, it wouldn't be an argument with me. The Germans are not thick. I mean, that's the highest. That was the highest point. So why not use it?
Yeah.
You could see further.
Could you tell me about any specific instances you remember using the Vickers gun or helping direct the fire of the Vickers gun at a specific target at Monte Cassino? I mean, was there...
Well, if it was a stationary object, you would find that, because they weren't advancing on us. We were trying to advance on them. So it was just a matter of putting your gun on an object and pressing the trigger.
And usually, what kind of targets would you fire at?
Well, it could be a window, a doorway, a roadway. It could, there was... You weren't firing at bodies because you couldn't see them. They were all in buildings.
Can you please talk to me about your living conditions in combat?
Dead rough. Dead rough. Yeah, he had a foxhole dug in the earth, or dug in the sand, or dug in the rocks. And that was it. You made the best of it you could. There was no facilities for making it better. Where you were is where you were. Stone-wise, sand-wise, or wherever it was.
What about food? I mean, what kind of food did you all get on the front lines?
Tinned. McConaughey's soup. McConaughey's stew. Corned beef. All kinds.
What would you say was the longest period that you went without a shower, when you're on the front?
It was probably casino. Because we ended up on the right side of casino, up in the hills. And we were probably the last pulled out because they bloody forgot about us.
You think they forgot about
Yeah, honestly.
Why? What makes you say that?
Well, we were up there about a month longer than anybody else. Somebody says, the soldiers over there.
What did you do in the month where everyone else was pulling out? What did you all do?
Well, we were lucky. We were up in the mountains. You don't get mud up in the mountains. When they took us out of the railway carriages in Monte Cassino and shifted us to the other side of the road, it was nice and dry in Greece from Athens.
Uh-huh.
I had shot me heel off, shot me twice in the head. What happened was we were in Athens and we were told that this massive force of communists were coming down from the north. Well, we got split men up and it was on the top of a hill, a very steep hill. And we had split up into 10 men patrols going up each street. And we got halfway up this street, halfway up the hill, and the firepower was terrific. And I said to Carl Russell, this is more than a so-and-so platoon, this. There's at least a couple of platoons of more than that. Because in a second a minute, I had 10 men with me. 7 of them were wounded, including myself. Jack Edwards picked me up off the floor with me webbing at the back. And I was only 9 stone 9 in those days. And he ran round the corner as if he was carrying a packet of groceries. Jack was a Welsh shepherd. He was 6'5", hands on him like a pair of shovels, and he must have run 30 yards with me, as if he was carrying a bag of groceries. We got there and I said, anybody else? And put a big pool on the floor, and it was me and 4 others. So half the patrol was injured in 2 volleys of fire. So it was a no-no. We really retired and started bringing the big guns up. The communists. We ended up eventually in the 2 main squares of Athens. They drove us back. There was that many of them. But there's always, we had a colonel. He was in charge of the long-range desert group. And of course, there was no deserts in Italy. So they sent him over to us. Pritchard had got made a brigadier, our colonel. So we caught a couple of thousand of the communists up against a monastery wall, and it was brought back to us, and he got all the vehicles he could, and we drove within about 400 yards and then switched the engines off and got the men to push all the vehicles closer. And we must have got, I would think 30, 35 yards. Then he switched the headlights on, all these vehicles, and they were all campfired along the wall. And there's whistles going, bugles going, and he walked with his cane under his arm. He walked forward, and who's in charge here? Typical British, and he found out who was in charge. He says, you've got 5 minutes to lay down your arms, or we open fire and massacre you. Please yourself. Let me know. And he walked back, and you could hear the rattle of rifles getting put together, and there's about, must be 1,500 to 200 men. And there was only 100 odd men facing them, really. And put them in 3-tonners, and away they went. The Germans, we actually followed the Germans out of Greece because they had to rush out of Greece because the Russians were coming through Bulgaria and cutting their escape route off. So it was just waving handkerchiefs at each other, really, like it wasn't a real war. They were just going, and, as long as they were on the move, we were quite happy.
Now, were the Greek communists, were they being supported by the Germans? Or were they?
No, the Germans ruled the roost. The communists were frightened of the Germans.
And they felt that...
The communists took over when the Germans went out.
And you guys were there to stop anyone from taking over.
Yeah.
Whether it was Germans or communists.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining that.
Well, it was house-to-house fighting. Yeah.
But can you tell me more about the actual house-to-house fighting? You mentioned you had to use the revolver. What was the incident?
Oh, there was one incident. They drove us eventually back to the 2 main squares. The communists. There was thousands and thousands of them. There was only 1,000 of us. And we held Constitutional Square and another square with a road which was in our charge. And we just kept going and cleaning houses. I needed a handkerchief. We come to an agreement with them that our serious wounded could go to hospital.
This was an agreement with the communists?
Yeah, and we was very quiet for a bit, and we never used to hear how they were getting on. So they sent a very large patrol, I wasn't on it, out to find out. And they found that the ambulance, which the last 6 was in, was burnt with our 6 lads in. They were burning our wounded. Any wounded that went, they were supposed to be taken to the hospital.
And they weren't being taken?
They were burning them.
So what did you all do in retaliation?
Well, we had a trick. We used to mouse hole, capture a house, go upstairs. It was all lath walls, punch a hole through, and if it was brick, we had half a stick, and just blowing a hole big enough to get through, and then start rolling Mills bombs downstairs. to the communists underneath. And I was the first through the hole. My officer was a South African. If he was an inch, he was 6'6". And he used to get hold of me at my webbing. I was only 9 stone 9, and soon the hole was bringing up. Come on, Alec, come and have a look.
Now, you know, when you're fighting the communists versus fighting the Germans, it's easy to vilify the Germans, you know, as these guys who were supporting Hitler, the SS. I mean, they were truly bad people. Was it hard for some of the men to fight the communists, or did you guys...
No, I'll tell you why it wasn't hard. We dug up a grave with 120 bodies in it. There were women and children, and all had their heads bashed in by communists and buried. Didn't even waste a bullet on them. We come across 2 graves like that.
You witnessed this yourself?
Actually seen it, yeah.
What was that like to see?
Well, I tell you what, there was a lot of communists getting shot that night extra. It was terrible.
Why would they do that to those women and children?
Because they were royalists, sticking up for the king.
That's the only reason they were murdered?
No other.
Just because they supported the king?
Yeah. Yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing that. I mean, because people don't know about this campaign at all.
They don't know half of what the communists did in Greece.
The makeup of the communists, what would you say, what did the general Greek communist, what did they look like? You know, what background did they have?
Ordinary human being, just with an obsession of communism. That's all. And communism means everything for the cause. They would die for the cause of communism.
Well, was Stalin in some way, was he supporting the Greek communists or giving them aid?
Well, that's something we don't know.
What do you think?
I wouldn't know. Our instructor at the parachute training course, Basil Lemaitre, that's a good French name, isn't it? He was in the first para battalion. They were there, out there. And twice he come through our lines on a stretcher. And twice he come back. You know, he was wounded in the buttocks, he was wounded in the shoulder. But they weren't big wounds, you know what I mean, stitched up and a couple of weeks out, you know. And he used to come back and he used to make the Vickers Platoon lay all the kit out, and he'd help himself. You know, he'd take your spoons and somebody else's to make his kit up. No, he was showing who was boss, that's all.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. There's times when patrols approached and got within 100 yards and then you shot them down. But you'd see them, but you what can you do? You can't go down and have a look at them with the war on.
You're talking about firing at the German patrols?
Yeah.
This would be your Vickers platoon firing?
No. The men in the platoon, but not the Vickers gun. You wouldn't use a Vickers gun on an 8-man patrol, would you?
You guys would see in a German patrol, and then you would open up with your personal weapons.
Yeah, but if you are opening up with a Vickers gun, I would think anything over 100 yards to well, best part of a mile, you could fire a gun. But under that, you were wasting good money. The British infantry, they'd be getting into a trench or out of a trench, you'd hear a crack and you'd see them go over. But both English troops, or our side, and German troops have snipers, which they send out. They get within 100 yards and they pick the targets. And everybody can see them falling over. But you can't see where the shot come from because they're camouflaged.
What's that like for you, you know, to see these men similar to yourself just getting killed?
Well, that's war, isn't it?
But I mean, I guess the worst part about it is that you're helpless because you don't know where the shot came from.
No, it never enters your head. What enters your head, he didn't hit me. Self-preservation always. Well, we were pulled back from Casino. Did a practice jump in Naples. And then right over to France.
Could you please take me through that operation? What do you remember about the invasion of southern France?
Well, we got in the plane, American pilots and an American jump master, which we don't have, in Naples. Flew across to southern France. Coming into southern France, over the Tannoy, we are now approaching enemy territory. And my mate says, where the F now do you think we're going? And all this we were getting, you know. And I think it was an American crew that were on the first mission. And they had a jump master. We don't have a jump master. Standing by the door. And my mate, Carl Russell, said, I wouldn't stand there, mate. You get dragged out. And next minute, we are now putting our protecting gear on. And they had like a sheet, metal stuff they were putting on the chest and back.
Flak jackets.
Flak jackets. And we all started laughing because we were in open next year. And then they come round with a bottle. I don't know what was in the bottle. And then they give you a big, large spoonful of whatever it was.
What do you think it was?
I don't know. It tasted, it could have been rum, I don't know, or something like that. I said, we don't get this treatment, you know. And then we come approaching, and this is when all the trouble started. We are now approaching enemy territory, as if we didn't want to know. And then AK guns, and the RAF come over and blew them all out, except one. There was one gun still, but he turned into a Spitfire, our pilot. 1 minute there was 20 of us in the toilet at the rear. Next minute there was 20 of us up with the driver. And then he...
Weren't you strapped in?
No, we never had a time to hook up onto the wire. All this happened before that. Next minute anyway, everybody was hooking up, and at first chance they got hooking up, and the number 1 was going number 6, and number 6 was going number 3. You know, we were dragging each other out. Anyway, after doing everything except loop the driver, the American, he was only a young lad, like, and so was his mate. And I got dropped into a a square mile of vineyards, and we had little clickers. You click twice, and if it was a friend coming towards you, he clicked back once. And this pretty big figure come towards me, 6'6". I clicked twice. I had a Tommy gun, loaded me Tommy gun, and a Welsh voice shouted, "Do not shoot! Do not shoot! It's a Sergeant Jenkins, I have lost my clicker." Sammy Jenkins, the PTI, physical training instructor. I said, "You stupid bugger." Anyway, it took us, we got onto the main road, and this is about 5 o'clock in the morning. We dropped at 4:30. And we heard this lovely baritone voice singing, and around the corner come a German kook, about 6'6", on a bike. He'd been kipping out with some French girl, I expect, going back to do the breakfast. Somebody put a rifle through his front wheel. He did a forward somersault, picked him up, piled all the equipment that we weren't using on him, shoved him out in front. And by then I had 6 men. I had 6 men with me. We got going, and then we turned a bend, and there's a hillside, and you could see the people on it, and they started firing at us, and it was 4 or 5 Germans with their girlfriends, French girlfriends. They'd been keeping out all night, and they were firing at us as well.
The girlfriends?
French girls, yeah.
So what did you all do?
We eventually backed up a bit, and we had cover. We got going. It was a day and a half before we got to where we should have been dropped by the plane.
You didn't open fire you didn't fire back at those Germans?
We only had so much ammunition. Well, I would think they were about 150, 200 yards. They weren't firing very good. After saying that, they were firing reasonably good. There was, we had one Hindu with us, very posh talk, been to college and university. His father was an officer, and as soon as we got back to it, he was going to WW2, to officer training course. He got half his moustache shut off. Instead of being there, they'd come round the side of us and they were firing across us. And you never heard so much laughing in your life.
So, what was your original objective? What were you all supposed to do in the first...
To get back to the dropping zone where we dropped.
But if you had been dropped where you were supposed to, what was your objective at that point?
The objective was to gather into a regiment.
And so you're dropped somewhere far away from your objective, from your drop zone.
Yeah.
After this incident with the officer getting his mustache fired off, what happens to you all then?
We had another half day to go.
And what happened?
To various... we had rifle fire off an old-fashioned house, and it was 200 yards away. There was splattering all over the show. And we only had what we carried, rifle. We had no supplies, ammunition-wise, and we'd used quite a lot. So I told them, don't return fire, just keep moving. And we moved out of their range. And that was, then we got picked up by some Americans. They spotted us in jeeps and come and picked us up and took us to the dropping zone.
And so once you got to the original drop zone, what happened then?
Well, we were arrested and then put through the showers, and the doctor gave us the once over to make sure everybody was all right. And they stitched his lip up a bit, and that was it. We were there, and in no time at all, we'd moved out of there. Literally, we did no fighting the Germans. R6. That were with me.
Yeah.
And all we did was that slight little thing with the Germans and the French girls. And there was a big house on the side of the road that fired at us. But beside that, we safely got back to where we wanted. And we were examined, re-equipped. And within a week, we were climbing up the side of a boat.
But after you made it to the original drop zone, sir?
Yeah.
Did you do any fighting of the Germans after that?
No, we were arrested.
So...
and we were there in how can I put us, in reserve if we needed.
What were you going to say about the Americans?
Well, he wasn't properly trained, that lad, was he? Or we wouldn't have taken us 1.5 days. We should have been dropped where we were sitting there now.
When you mentioned as he flew you into southern France, you mentioned the anti-aircraft fire coming up.
Yeah.
Did you hear it or could you see it from where you...
No, you see an explosion, little white puffs.
Say that again?
Little white puffs of where they burst. That's what you're seeing.
And did you see any planes in the formation getting hit?
No. We were too busy picking ourselves up off the bloody floor.
But you mentioned that the RAF came and they destroyed a bunch of the emplacements.
There was, according to what I found out, there was quite a few ACAC guns there, and they were all blown up previously.
From the RAF?
Yeah.
Except that one?
Yeah, except that one.
And do you think the pilot just got scared, or was that anti-aircraft gun, was that a serious danger to your plane?
Well, of course it was. It was bursting close enough to rock the plane. So, he did everything he could. I'm not... he was just trying to keep alive like we were.
So after you get back from France, what happens?
We went to Naples again, dropped into Greece. We were dropped right on the airport, the German airport.
Pretend I don't know anything about the background of the Greek campaign, Mr. Sutton. What was the reason that British soldiers were being sent to Greece?
Because the Germans were there. No other reason. And don't forget that half the English aristocracy are Greek. And you look after me, I'll look after you. Job,
Now, how does that make you feel that men's lives were being put on the line and men were getting killed, not to protect the British people, but because the royalty had ties to the country?
No, you're wrong. The British soldier, just as he's told. He's not interested who's running and who's winning, and if you're told to do that, you do it. And the Greek monarchy were okay as far as we're concerned.
Fair enough. So could you tell me about the actual jump into Greece?
We jumped and we landed. You're going to laugh when I say this. It was British planes that dropped us, and they dropped us on the airport. You didn't have to walk, you were dropped right in the airport.
Was it a daytime or nighttime operation?
Morning drop. We must have dropped about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning.
And was that your original drop zone, the airport?
Yeah.
How come they didn't just land?
Because it was occupied, that's why. And a German infantry division there. But we landed on it there. There was fighting for 4 hours there. We landed just outside the barbed wire. Jack Lambert, my sergeant, I was only a corporal there, he landed in the barbed wire, broke both his legs. I had to get a pair of wire cutters, cut my way through, and borrow somebody's blade to make sure that it wasn't going to blow me bloody self up getting through the wire to him, because it was all landmined.
Were there any times that some of the mines went off?
Well, not while I was there, no, but it would be.
And so
I got through, dragged him out, and he'd broke both his legs. So I made him comfortable. Got the medic there to have a look at him. And you get scroungers when you get drop zones like this. You get Greek or French or whoever they are, scroungers picking up what's left.
What do you mean?
Well, if a man's dead there, he's got a watch on him, hasn't he? He's got a pair of glasses on him. He might have some food on him.
So the civilians would come.
Yeah.
And just take from the dead.
Yeah. It happens all right through life, that. Yeah. But anyway, I got him comfortable. And this big buxom wench was coming towards me, one of the pillagers. So, hey, come here, you. Get down on your hands and knees. She got down. I put Jack's head in her lap. Like, I says, you'll be getting picked up soon, Jack. I says, you won't get sunburnt, will you? Breasts on her. Bloody hell. Big pair of knockers she had. Resting on Jack's head. But I never seen Jack until after the war.
What did he say?
I rang him up, and it was somebody gave me his telephone number. And I when I left him, I took all his eating kit, his rations with me, because he wasn't going to need it on the plane. And 30 years later, somebody gave me his number. And he's from Yorkshire. And the tightest lot of people he ever got in England is Yorkshire people. And
the what kind of people?
Tight, wouldn't give you a smile unless you paid them,
Oh, they're not very nice.
Oh, and I said, Alex Sutton speaking, Jack. He said, who? I said, Alex Sutton. You remember who used to be your corporal? He says, yeah. You're the bastard that's told me 24-hour ration pack. I says, you've got a good memory for 30 years. They're tight, honest.
Was he joking, or you think?
No, serious. He's from Yorkshire.
Oh, he doesn't.
They're all the same there. Yeah, right on top of them.
As you made your jump into Greece, what kind of enemy fire did you take on?
None.
How come?
Well, the only thing that was guarded was the aerodrome that had AK guns or anything. So it was when I say none, you were in the air. really out the plane before they start. Don't forget it. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. Everybody was asleep, and there's no reason why the AK gun wouldn't. They'd be asleep. There was no sign of us ever invading them. Anyway, they opened up all right, but there wasn't a lot.
And so, how high was? At what altitude was the plane when you jumped out?
Well, it's usually about in between 800 and 600
feet.
Yeah.
And so once you got on...
No, it'll be more than that. It'll be 1,000 to 800.
So once you got down on the ground,
yeah.
Can you tell me about the German resistance you faced, please?
Well, we were outside of the entanglement of wire and everything, and so there was nobody there. You don't meet anybody until you're the other side of the wire.
Okay.
Because that's part of their defence. We approached and eventually got in. And after 4 hours fighting, they beat it, and away they went the other side. And they were in a hurry to get out anyway.
But you mentioned 4 hours fighting.
Yeah.
But Mr. Sutton, what happened in those 4 hours?
Well, they were killing each other, weren't they?
But what were you doing? What did you see going on during those 4 hours?
I got a stick of men together, we got in, and the fighting was in front of us, if you know. There was a line like that, and we were behind it, advancing, and all we were really getting was stragglers.
Germans?
Yeah. That had either kidded somebody, they were dead, and then getting up when the fella's gone past him, you know. I don't know, but very little work we had to do.
What would you guys do to those Germans who pretended to be dead and then would get up in front of you?
To make sure they were dead. Kill them. I was more interested in getting the rest of the gun crew together, collecting our guns out the containers, joining the main body. And then the main body of support group would all be together. And that's the idea of getting a platoon by platoon together, and then you've got your battalion together, and then that was it.
I mean, these Germans have to be pretty thick if they're going to pretend to be dead in front of the front line British that are there.
No, it could
why would they get up in front of you?
Could have been knocked unconscious. Anything, you know. They were throwing missiles around, bombs around, mills grenades around. You'd be surprised how many they knock unconscious by the blast.
But from what you remember, it's not like you had a counterattack of Germans.
No.
You would have a...
They were trying to get... We left the airport.
Yeah.
We marched for about half a day, and we were taken in a fleet of boats across a bay to save time and effort. Landed there and then marched into Athens. And Athens had just been vacated by the Germans, and the 4th Battalion was sent after the Germans, 4th Paratrooper, to keep them on the move. And the other 2 battalions stayed in Athens, and everything was fine. And then the communists come down out the hills. That was that was it.
What was the state of Athens like? Was it destroyed or?
No, it was in pretty good nick.
Now you've mentioned multiple times that the communists, they would come out of the hills. I mean, were most of the communists from the rural areas of Greece?
Yeah. And the big towns, the communism has no...
Geography.
It just spreads like wildfire. Yeah.
Whenever you're ready.
A poem by Alex Sutton. Youth. Early one morning before the sun begins to shine, 20 young paras stood in a line, flying in at DC 47 at 1,000 feet, all looking forward to the coming treat. Static line, hooked up, jump through the door, chute fully open, falling to the floor. Guns at the ready, running through the Gaelic glen. Quick roll call, check for missing men. Once more outnumbered, but ready for the fight. Wherever there is war, wherever there is strife, there's little white crosses where a para's give his life.
How long ago did you write that?
I wrote all the poems a year after the wife died, and I haven't wrote anything since. That's 34 years ago.
How come you haven't been writing anything since?
I don't want to. She caught me at a bad time, and there's not many people can say that.
What do you mean?
She caught me feeling sorry for her. She just died and buried when I wrote all these poems.
It was a way of coping?
Probably was. I don't know. There's a couple of good ones about the war.